Hi, welcome to Politics for People Who Hate Politics, Episode 9. That's a lot of episodes, so that's pretty exciting. All right, the guests today, we've got Joe, because that's good. We like Joe. He's related to me. That's good. We have Michelle. We have Adam Berkeley, who is not quite a panel staple yet. This is his second time on, but he did so well, even while lying down in the dark and not looking at the camera last time. And we also have our notable human being guest, who once let me sleep on his couch, and that was nice of him, Jordan Bloom, who's the opinions editor of the Daily Caller, and he used to be an associate editor for the American Conservative. And he writes a blog that seems really interesting, but has too many big words for me, so I don't read it as often as I should. Thank you for joining me, everybody.
Surely.
Surely.
All right. So many deadpan people. So little time. Okay. Well, if I drink the coffee, we'll get this going. All right. I guess we're gonna start with Jordan, if that really is your name, because there's always been some debate about that. Can you tell us about, a couple weeks ago, your piece on Ben Smith of BuzzFeed and the freedom conservative, liberty conservative nonsense idea that basically was trying to be opaque about neoconservatism? Can you kind of sum up your article for the people?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ben Smith wrote this sort of 10,000-foot big think piece about how we're going to talk about right-wingers in a new way. We're gonna separate them into two groups: the liberty conservatives and the freedom conservatives. And the liberty conservatives are the the Ron Paul, the Rand Paul types, the people who care more about lost liberty here than spreading it abroad. And the freedom conservatives are the opposite. And as an autistic follower of these issues, at the end of the piece, he credits Michael Goldfarb with coming up with the term freedom conservatives. And
that would be the dude in charge of the Free Beacon,
that would be the chairman of the Center for American Freedom, the 501c4 that runs the Free Beacon, or the Center for American Freedom, the nonprofit that is above the Free Beacon, the publication. And so it suggested to me that this was sort of transparent rebranding. The neocons are not popular anymore, so they don't want to be called neocons. And so I wrote a piece about it, and also, mentioning the somewhat cozy relationship between BuzzFeed and the Free Beacon themselves. BuzzFeed is hired from the Free Beacon. Ben Smith has had a long relationship with Goldfarb. They've had a working relationship for at least 3 or 4 years. According to so I also looked in. And I think I'm the first righty to have written about it. But Goldfarb is he's literally a foreign agent. He's in the employ of foreign governments, or at least he was. He may still be, particularly Georgia. That was probably the biggest one. And so I mentioned that. And neocons don't really like. It's sort of the suggestion of dual loyalty that they can't really stand. And usually when that ugly accusation comes up, it's usually with relation to Israel. And I wasn't suggesting that he's some sort of Likudist fifth column. He's literally in the employ of a foreign government. That's a pretty substantially different accusation.
I mean, does he deny that fact?
No, he hasn't denied it. He actually said in his in the follow-up piece that was running above the fold in the Free Beacon, sort of a character assassination of me.
Yeah, I called you an anti-Semite.
He called me an anti-Semite, and but he admitted in that piece that all my facts were right. So. And I have yet to hear another word from him. But I wrote a piece at my blog just 2 days ago talking about and so I wish I had written a long piece about a month or two ago about Anglican neocons, and I wish I hadn't pulled it. I pulled it for personal reasons because my family attends one of these breakaway Anglican churches, which happen to be filled, at least in Virginia, with a lot of hawkish people. I pulled that one, but I wish I hadn't because it would have been a good riposte to the accusation that I'm an anti-Semite. Like I hate Christian neocons too. I don't hate them. I just think they're wrong. But so I wrote that up, and interestingly, one of the more incriminating, fascinating little points of data is a vestryman at the Falls Church, one of these breakaway Anglican congregations in Northern Virginia. A vestryman, which is just sort of the lay body that governs the church. One of the vestrymen is a charter school magnate in D.C. And before that, he was a CEO of an energy company which bought the electricity grid in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, which is one of Goldfarb's clients. And of course, Matthew Continetti, the editor of the Free Beacon, if you read his 2010 profile of how awesome Georgia's being under Saakashvili, he praises Saakashvili's electrification efforts. So it's a ridiculous little circle jerk. And
I mean, the aim here with these people is, like, a lot of people say it's actually to start a new Cold War. Do you think it's actually that direct? Like, they actually want a new conflict with Russia for various reasons?
I think that's it's sort of it's a conspiracy of bad assumptions, not a real conspiracy, I guess. I think the people at the Free Beacon really genuinely and sincerely do think that, you know, Iran is an existential threat to America for some reason. It's not it's an evil system that doesn't require evil behavior from any of its members, you know, and that's what I've been trying to emphasize to people. But as far as wars go, I think the reason why my piece inspired the reaction that it did and the strong response from Goldfarb is that they're not used to people hitting back. You know, the neocons have been going after. I think it would be fair to say our people for years now, and what they don't like is that someone hit back. And the fact is, if things are going to change in the Republican Party, more people are going to have to start hitting back.
I know that your colleague Jamie Weinstein, I was on HuffPost Live with him once, actually talking about neocons, and he's repeated this since then. But like, he basically says that nobody knows what a neocon is anymore except a thing they don't like. And I feel like that's sort of like they have like a bit of a martyr thing going on just because they're not as fashionable as they were a couple years ago.
Exactly, and it is poorly applied, but that's a weaselly way of getting out of actually talking about them and how they really haven't gone anywhere. I mean, Robert Kagan had that cover story in the New Republic just recently about what America still owes the world, and his wife is in the Obama administration. I mean, these people are still there.
Mm-hmm. Back a little bit to the whole, like, the liberty conservative, freedom conservative thing. I just, like, laughed at when I first saw, because, like, that's not a good way to actually differentiate between beliefs. That's like, it was a bizarre suggestion, because I mean, you can't tell what the hell, that doesn't mean anything. Like, liberty or freedom. These guys support liberty and these guys support freedom. Like,
yeah, and what really sort of chafed my balls about it is that I've always been partial to, if you're going to pick a concept, liberty or freedom, I've always sort of been partial to freedom. You know, because liberty is a guy in a powdered wig, freedom is a guy in a kilt with a claymore. You know, and I've always sort of been partial to freedom as a concept, and to have that tarred with these warmongers that have nothing to do with liberty or freedom was sort of I don't know, I didn't like that.
Yeah, I just think it seems like a deliberate attempt to be more opaque, which
also get rid of loaded terms that neither side particularly likes to be using. I mean, John Bolton doesn't like to be called a neocon, and he isn't, but, you know, for all purposes. No, he's not.
He's an asshole, but that's a different story.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, even if you're a hawkish realist, which is technically what he is, you know, if you're employed by AEI and Fox News, what are you going to be saying? You're going to be making assumptions about American power. You're going to be writing things, you know, in that vein. Yeah.
I always found it bizarre that AEI is supposedly, you know, one of, like, the friends of libertarianism. I always thought that was completely bizarre, because they have a lot of really awful, really hawkish people working for them. It seems almost like a litmus test for them. That's weird. Opening up discussion about neocons, I guess. Do you guys have some words about this?
Well, I was going to say it's a conscientious rebranding, kind of, to get away from neocon, because that word, you know, itself is kind of tarnished. through the neocon legacy of Bush and Cheney and all them. So
Yeah, I wonder why it's
kind of
tarnished there, buddies. Like, it just pisses me off that they're trying to, like Blackwater changing their name. Like, if you change your name, suddenly it's going to fix all the things that happened.
Right, and it's kind of like, when liberalism wanted to become progressivism,
Yeah, progressive sounds so damn positive, right?
Right.
How could you be against progress? I hate that word, too.
Right.
I'm against progress. But I actually am most interested in how many iterations previously that neoconservatism has gone through. Because a lot of these guys have been, in the government since the 70s and 80s. So how many iterations of this type of philosophy have we actually seen? It's only come into being because Bush rode that wave of, versus there was the compassionate conservatism, which is its own oxymoron. But then post 9/11, they were able to be like, look, we're the ones who are out there. We're going to put bullets in turbans. That's not my quote. And and they were able to ride that popularity and that violence, into kind of the front seat of American politics. And now that they've been kicked out of the car, it's time to turn around and put on some new clothes. But I think that's happened before several times.
I mean, I guess I could ask any of you this, but back to Jordan for a second. Like, what in brief is a neocon? Like, if Bolton, for example, doesn't apply and he's a hell of a hawk.
Well, so it's an intellectual tradition above all, and it grows out of the sort of Wilsonian internationalist assumptions that America has a responsibility to to stand for its values, not just its national interests. Stand for peace and freedom, democracy, human rights, etc. The entire list of UN-approved platitudes. And I'd say that's a pretty good definition. John Bolton doesn't fall into that category because he believes in the national interest. He just has a really hawkish understanding of what that is.
Acting as if there's some sort of scientific way to tell who qualifies as a neocon or anything else is sort of silly as well.
Well, right. And then the other thing that it must be said is that neoconservatism is very much a family affair. The Free Beacon is the editor-in-chief is Bill Kristol's son-in-law. These and John Podhoretz, he's the son of Norm Podhoretz, and still he's a hawkish columnist. It's a very small group of people, Robert Kagan, Victoria Nuland, etc. There really aren't very many of these people.
Jordan, you don't mean to say that there's dynastic politics going on in America, do you?
That might be one way of putting it, but I mean, you can trace the decline of neoconservatism as an intellectual movement, and I'm not opposed to neoconservatism by any means. I think it's done a lot of good things, like Daniel Bell. I think the injection of social science into the right is very much the neocons' inheritance. You see people bringing in social science to the conservative movement. How can we trim the welfare state rather than just treating it as something that needs to be abolished as like a moral evil? The old right was characterized by an emphasis on literature and the intellectual tradition, as opposed to the neocons come in and they've got the social science. And I think a lot of that legacy is really good. It lives on in AEI, but as far as the foreign policy goes, I don't think that's as good.
And it's not like the neocons have any, they're not the only ones pushing the U.S. into foreign conflicts and war. I mean, basically since Wilson, pretty much.
Well, when you get neocon as shorthand for interventionist, maybe you do get a bit muddy, but.
Or shorthand for Jew, and that's that's also really dodgy territory.
Well, yeah, it is true that in the world there are the anti-Semitic boogeymen that you were recently accused of being. You just aren't one, as far as I know. And neither am I, and neither are most people that I talk to for more than 4 minutes. I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know. I don't know enough of the history of the right as an intellectual movement to speak on this, and I guess I'll just keep on pissing off Jamie Weinstein and equating interventionism with neoconservatism.
Yeah, and I think the point I was driving at is that neoconservatism used to be a very intellectually robust thing, and we've gone from Irving Kristol to Bill Kristol to Matt Continetti, and
so that's a decline.
I would say that that's a decline.
I mean, from my understanding, the whole weird Trotskyite influence in the neocons as well. I mean,
yeah, I love bringing that up.
Yeah, does that? I mean,
so,
do they
so
really admit that?
Is what?
Do they? I mean, do they talk about that as an influence anymore?
No, not really. But I mean, if you're talking about a global permanent democratic revolution regime, that's Trotskyism. They've brought it into the House, and but shit, I lost my train of thought.
I mean, in some ways, neoconservatism is, to me, it's the type of conservatism that is less hypocritical in that they don't pretend to be for a small government on any type of principle. And well, like with the welfare state, you said, like, they don't talk about getting rid of it because this is America and bootstraps and stuff. In some ways, they admit that we need some sort of robust state, and as long as it has certain principles, the state has certain principles behind it, then the size of it doesn't really matter. Does that go with your thinking on neocons?
Yeah, I think more or less.
Yeah.
To follow up on the Trotskyite thing, there are actually, so in the piece I wrote in my blog about these Anglican neocons, one of the interesting overlaps is between the Institute on Religion and Democracy. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It was basically founded to be a sort of right-wing counterweight to the World Council of Churches. And the World Council of Churches is a set of mainline Protestant denominations that's pretty thoroughly leftist. Like they had one of their conferences in the late 90s in Harare under Mugabe. They've been big Mugabe boosters. And so this was founded to be sort of a counterweight to that. And the IRD actually grew out of the Scoop Jackson wing of the Democratic Party. And one of the founders was David Jessup, who is a founder of Social Democrats USA. And then what else? He was a Shockmanite, which is sort of this Trotskyite sect out of New York City. And so the IRD is now seen as sort of this conservative movement standard bearer for making reinstilling conservative values in mostly American Protestantism. But again, there a lot of in the mid-2000s they were telling churches to shut up about the Iraq War, and so I think there really needs to be the conservative movement needs to come to terms with what it's going to stand for in war and peace.
Hopefully, a little more on the peace side. That would be ideal. But I'm not going to hold my breath about that, because not even libertarians can get that one right. And no offense to Jordan, but I expect slightly more from libertarians than from the right. And they still fail. So, I don't know. I'm cranky about war lately, guys. I'm cranky about Israel. I don't know. I feel like we could just move on to a new topic, Joe. Be decisive about that. Let's be decisive.
Yes, let's move on, Lucy.
So, I don't know, a couple days ago there was a National Review piece by A.J. Delgado, I think, about how conservatives, because I guess that's kind of our topic a bit for the day, conservatives need to stop excusing the police. And Bill Maher, who I despise but I like to hate watch with my father quite often, did a little monologue on his last show where he talked, it was like the facts of it were totally fine, talking about, problems with the American police and stuff. Like, it was a good general summation of the issue. But he also said, of course, like, why isn't the Tea Party mad about this? And basically, implied that this was some sort of liberal cause, and I don't want to be one of those like commenters who's like, well, this is nothing new, why are you saying this? But he wasn't giving due credit to the kind of people who have been talking about this for probably a lot longer than he has. I don't know, I think that in my experience, the police thing is starting to become a, dare I say it, bipartisan or like tripartisan issue. Which is good, but I don't know. Do you guys think that there's any truth to the fact that perhaps in the past hippies getting beaten up by police and such. This was more true. But I think lately, this criticism isn't as actually relevant as it might have been a couple, decades ago. Yeah. Words.
I mean, I think, like, from a technical perspective, I think we can see that police tactics are definitely getting more and more military. That's pretty obvious, and certainly the equipment is getting more military. And there's only so many times that you can shoot people through doors and toss flashbangs into cribs before it becomes a human problem and not an ideological issue.
I mean, that's sort of optimistic, unfortunately.
Well, I think I feel like this. You ask, is it becoming an obsolete criticism? I think it is to some degree. I think there's more and more awareness because you see more and more. I mean, there's now second video of illegal chokeholds being used in New York. Now, it shouldn't surprise anyone that people are that cops in New York are using chokeholds. I live most of the time in New York City. It's not the greatest police force, but I think that we're getting to the point where it's not easy for certain people to dismiss those people as being black or drug addicts or deranged in some way. We're starting to see situations. There was a situation in Seattle where the gentleman was held down by 3 transit officers, then shot by a sheriff. And I think we're starting to see that it's becoming more of a human problem and less of an ideological problem. But of course, those things always take time because we need to support the boys in blue.
They do take time, and that's the horrible thing is that it's true. Like it's harder to dismiss the problem when it comes to the door of the mayor of a suburb in Maryland, I guess, that Shay Calvo got a couple of years ago.
Well, it's a lot harder.
I think there is some truth. Sorry, Joe?
I was going to say, it's a lot harder with, the proliferation of, cell phones with video cameras and the internet, blogging and all these different sites. The police can't really get away with what they used to be able to get away with. There's more witnesses.
They can get away with it. We just know it's happening, definitely.
Well, you don't know how much had happened in the past, though. There's no, there's not the record that there is now. Mm-hmm. People can take pictures, people can, surreptitiously take cell phone videos, and I think there is kind of, a movement growing, even on the right. Charles C.W. Cook had a good piece about the same thing in National Review.
I read that, yeah.
And, I think it's being forced into the spotlight, and, people are actually having to deal with it now instead of just kind of, poo-pooing the fact, oh, no, those are isolated incidents.
Isolated incidents, yes. The running Radley Balko joke about the same story being repeated scores of times. One thing, though, that comes to my mind is the whole, in the 90s, criticizing, the critiques were mostly directed at federal law enforcement, I think. In the 90s, you have your Ruby Ridge and your Waco scenarios. And there was definitely a certain amount of liberal excuses for these incidents and just for feds, they don't like and there's still some of that today. Like Rachel Maddow can still do a little screed about the horror of the time someone from the NRA called the ATF jackbooted thugs, and I, never liked the NRA better than when I heard that. So I fear that there is still an element of the partisan switching back and forth depending on who's president and what kind of fears are in fashion.
Actually, one of the things that brings up the point, so in those types of incidents, those previous incidents, you typically get like the SWAT teams from the federal SWAT teams. But they've been so busy in Afghanistan, I actually feel like this may have kept them away from some of these incidents in the United States. They've been so busy running around with the Tier 1 units in Afghanistan that we haven't had a lot of these guys, like the HRT guys, in America for a long time. It's only like recently that they've actually been operating in the States again.
And I think it's worth pointing out that not all cops are created equal. You've got the like in New York, the sheriff's departments of most of the counties in New York are defying the SAFE Act, refusing to enforce it, and things like that. So to some extent, making the case for criminal justice reform to conservatives is going to entail you should support these cops because you can control them better and they're closer to your interests and they speak for your interests better than, say, a state police department or something like that.
That's still going to maybe end in a sort of partisanal divide, though. I mean, liberals. I think it might be fair to say that in general, liberals have been more down on local police departments, and conservatives have been more down on federal law enforcement. And there's still an element of that, and I suppose in theory, you know, the federal law enforcement is worse and can do more damage. But the real danger is, of course, the fact that they're invariably tied together, and there's a whole incentive structure to tie them together. And something like asset forfeiture, as long as you have, you know, one DEA guy in your drug bust, then you get the federal asset forfeiture law kicks in, and you tend to have a sweet pot of federal money to fund your new police, you know, tank or equivalent.
No, just to bring up the sweet pots of federal money, it might be slightly off topic, but the cell phone tracking systems. I don't know if you guys are aware of this.
The Stingrays?
Yeah, with the federal grants, they give you the money, you give it back to them, we give you the Stingray, here you go. I think that's an interesting thing. I actually think a lot of these issues, I mean, they've always existed, but they've become exacerbated by the massive amount of money that came out of Washington post 9/11. I mean, I'm in Fairfax County now. I lived in Loudoun County, Virginia, and the policing is just, the equipment is ridiculous, but the general attitude of the police has always interested me. Is in they have this sort of sense that they're protecting something greater than their county, and I think generally across the board, there's been I think we might be starting to see, just because of budget crunches, less money for police departments. But I think post 9/11 there was a huge influx of government money for national security, and I feel like that's affected this to some degree. Also, I remember I've met a few veterans, like Iraq veterans, that had come back, and that's a job that they frequently are able to get. Police departments certainly love veterans, and that was an issue in Loudoun County for a time, in which traffic stops became almost like car searches at green zone checkpoints, and there were several incidents of like older women or pregnant women being slammed against the hoods of their cars and things because these veterans had been improperly counseled or not counseled at all, and then given a gun and a badge and told to enforce the laws. So there was definitely some aggression issues out here, and I wonder sometimes, not to stain veterans by any stretch, but I do wonder sometimes if it's necessarily appropriate for these people to go from policing one street to another street. Just a thought.
Well, oddly enough, I've heard a couple of, admittedly anecdotal, but I read and heard a couple of people say that over in Afghanistan and Iraq, a lot people who were on police forces and then became soldiers over there they were the ones where other soldiers were like, what the fuck is this guy up to? Like,
I've heard that as well.
Calm down, buddy.
I've heard that as well, yeah.
Which, I mean, that is hilarious in a very dark way. Not that I really want foreign people treated, badly either, but it doesn't bode well for us, certainly, and perhaps it's some sort of twisted collective justice, but no, it's not.
I mean, I don't have quite the hatred, I guess, of police that you do, Lucy.
I would go on, Joe. Go on.
But a lot of it, I feel like, is tied up in the amount of laws there are and the bad laws there are. I mean, that can't be ignored when you're talking about these police incidents. There's so many bad laws that allow police to do this kind of thing. You can't just let them run free and make all the legislature. There has to be better laws and more precise laws about these kind of things. All this searching of people's cars for no reason on a police stop. Stuff like that has to be eliminated, and I feel like you will see less kind of police incidences of brutality.
I mean, that's true. That's part of the problem. I just don't think that excuses the behavior of cops.
I mean, it doesn't excuse it. I just feel like it's something that doesn't get brought up enough when we're
talking
about cops.
There's this strange thing I've noticed with some of the people I talk to who are, passionate about criminal justice issues, where they're almost, reluctant to talk about these issues, like botched raids and whatever, because they fear being lumped into this category of, being some Bundy extremist. Like if they say anything bad about cops or law enforcement, that they should belong on a Bundy ranch or whatever. And it's just really interesting that I don't know, just in talking to people that's kind of their mindset. I'm like, yeah, I agree. Those things are definitely, there are a lot of things wrong, but I don't want to be lumped in with the type of people they think usually comment on those issues.
Those people need to man up, but
yeah,
I mean, I think it's becoming more mainstream. If you browse the comments on, any police brutality story, in my experience, at least in the past, 2 or 3 years, you're going to get at least half, probably more people who are actually saying, what the hell, police officers. I get a lot of Vice people who are, I think, trying to troll me and are actually taking issue with the things I write about cops for Vice, but generally speaking, it is becoming more mainstream, and that's good.
I think there was a wave of patriotism. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, if we're going to bring up the Clive and Bundy thing, I think this is really interesting. There's that county in southern Oregon that its subsidies were cut for its public land, and they were going to have to raise taxes or cut their sheriff's department, and they voted not to raise their taxes and instead have just put together a sort of citizens patrol, and that's effectively their police department for now. And I think that may be the how things start to look in the future. And then back to Clive and Bundy, I think these land use issues really are going to be the place where these sort of patriot oath keeper type people are. These conflicts are going to get more and more intense, I think. Especially over land use, and it will be, if there's anything, I've talked to a Naderite friend of mine about this, and we were just sort of, shooting the shit, asking what would be the thing that would cause large-scale civil strife and violence to break out in America, and we decided, he suggested, and I agreed, that it would probably be environmental legislation that would impose greater control over, natural resources out west, and people just say no. States and municipalities start pushing back, like Clive and Bundy on a whole nother level. And I don't know, I think that's that's sort of an interesting way of framing how these oath keeper, police versus not police debates are going to go down.
Yeah, it's like a tangent, but it's one that intrigues me. I do think that I think that to say something half-assed nice about law enforcement, I do think that even though nobody was punished for Waco, and that was your words can't describe how ridiculously terrible that was, I think the shadow of that actually does make federal law enforcement ease back a bit. It's weird because you had this increase in individual SWAT raids on private homes. But at the same time, when it comes to sort of a potential classic standoff thing, I think that they're actually afraid of another Waco, especially in the era of everyone with cameras. Right. And that has given them...
Clive and Bundy's ranch. Yeah, definitely. They're sort of they seem to have taken a let those hayseeds have their protest, we'll restore law and order when they leave sort of attitude.
And you get the liberals who were a little too, maybe not bloodthirsty, but they were like, they were carrying guns around law enforcement. Why didn't you round them all up and shoot them? And it's the 90s thing all over again. I think you still have, and you still have conservatives thinking, damn, hippies deserved it when somebody gets beaten. Occupy so and so gets beaten by the NYPD. There is still this element of picking your favorite people and picking your favorite law enforcement and assuming that ill intentions on the other side of these types of conflicts. So it's getting better, but there's still this partisan thing, I think.
I'm sure Waco affected the rules of engagement for federal law enforcement. Even just from the bad publicity standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure, as bad as they can be, I'm sure that affected it.
That's the thing. Things can change slightly, but we're still not at the point where people get consequences for these actions. Like, I'm sorry, if the
Well,
Fullerton
that would
cops
be
get
admitting
off
fault.
scot-free.
I mean, you want people in a government organization to admit fault.
Well, that's a whole.
Well, no, fucking Janet Reno admitted fault to Waco, which meant nothing for her career or for anyone else.
Well, if you're the Attorney General, your admission of fault is not the same thing as actually finding a sworn federal officer at fault.
Yeah, but I mean, it was rhetoric, nothing more. And
Well, of course, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well,
actual consequences.
You'd have to challenge the police unions too for there to be actual consequences.
Yeah, the Fraternal Order of Police, I do hate them, I think.
And that's,
even if I don't hate every police officer.
That's something the liberals are going to be.
Sticker for my car.
I'm sorry?
I hate them because they won't give me a sticker for my car.
Why would they?
If you have a Fraternal Order of Police sticker, you don't get pulled over.
I thought you were going to say that. Actually, and that's you know, my mom actually donated $10 to a police organization once because she thought that come the Alex Jones apocalypse of tyranny, like she'd be safe on a list. And what she got was them calling her all the time to donate more money. And then she accidentally told them that she was against the war on drugs, and she says the guy seemed really dour and unfriendly after that. And they didn't speak again. So there are some bad. Sometimes that's not good. All right, well, something NWA. Next topic. We had two options for our final big topic here in our next, however long we're going to go here. I think perhaps we all know that Mark Ames is a terrible person, and we can all just take a moment to appreciate that.
Just nod our heads.
Bow our heads. No offense, certain religious people who may be present. I think that maybe, even though we've already trashed BuzzFeed a lot, and we did it on that one other podcast, I'm kind of interested in what people have to say about the kerfuffle and firing at BuzzFeed for plagiarism. Benny Johnson, the right Republican, maybe slightly sympathetic to libertarians, at least he spoke at SFL, Students for Liberty at one point, has been fired for plagiarism. And insert BuzzFeed joke here because there is an element of humor in someone being fired from BuzzFeed for plagiarism, even though they admittedly have had some longer form essays and reporting that at least is not cat gifs. Did you guys follow this, and do you think it warrants a firing? And does it warrant the sort of Twitter schadenfreude that I've seen a bit of?
It doesn't matter if it warrants his firing. The DC media world, Politico, Poynter, Neiman, all of them jumped in, and they don't like BuzzFeed's business model. So they're looking for an excuse to get somebody out of BuzzFeed. I mean, Ben Smith had to cave when the second blog post came out, revealing the 6 other instances. And in the story, or the editor's note that was posted to BuzzFeed either last night or this morning, they had gone through his work, and I think the total was 41 instances. So, you know, it was impossible not to fire him. There's an interesting parlor game to be played about whether, you know, stealing text is the same thing as stealing images, which is what they also do.
Right.
I don't know. I don't really care. I think it's sad that I wish. When BuzzFeed hires an isolationist or a libertarian, I'll believe that I'll be a little bit more favorable to them. But so far, their only two right-leaning people are, you know, it's Catherine Miller, who was hired from the Free Beacon, and Benny Johnson, who was a serial intern and plagiarist. And then, you know, Rosie Gray, who reports on a lot of right-wing people. Like just about all of her sources and who she quotes consistently are all neocons and hawks. They've got some explaining to do.
Beyond plagiarism in the hilariously titled
Reddit.
Johnson articles.
I'm beginning to think they're against us.
Quite.
I mean, does all this mean that BuzzFeed politics is more relevant than I thought it was?
I don't know.
We're certainly trying to make it that way.
I can't tell what's relevant because of Twitter. I'm not even in DC, and I still get the element of, like, really unable to tell what's relevant to the larger world. Because what's relevant to the larger world is actually just One Direction or something like that.
I barely even knew that there was like a news to be perfectly honest.
Well, I think there's potential for the hilarious bullshit content subsidizing good content. And in theory, you could do worse. You know, you could have no good in-depth reporting at all, but whether they're really doing good reporting is another matter, I suppose. And I think
I just want cat pictures.
I mean, I feel like this is a thing that's so, you know, this is Sharknado again. This is a bunch of people on Twitter kind of being all up, you know, this is, oh, it's so big on Twitter, and then you look in the rest of the world, literally no one cares. No one who reads, I mean, what's the percentage of people who read BuzzFeed who know Benny Johnson is, you know, a kind of conservative writer for them, or do
a lot of people read BuzzFeed.
Well, I think the real reason why this is such an issue is that BuzzFeed, their business model makes a lot of journalists nervous, and so when they can take a shot at them, they will.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the amount of Schadenfreude that I did see on Twitter was, you know, a little outrageous, and yeah, it's a shame because. Actually, I don't know if it's a shame.
Well, I mean, BuzzFeed, as a publication, has helped me be more peeved at Schadenfreude because I'm so tired of the Twitter mob. But I don't know which BuzzFeed writer it was, but it wasn't Benny Johnson. It was someone else who did the whole woman makes ill-advised, potentially actually not at all racist joke about South Africa.
That was Kaczynski.
In the air for 12 hours, and then a terrifying mob of people decide that she's the worst human on earth. I mean, BuzzFeed has helped with that kind of thing, so if I was more collectivist, I might say that this was some kind of justice, but I don't think that that was really this guy's MO as much as not. But another question, though, is like the ethics thing, like whether journalistic ethics and attribution applies to GIF lists. I mean, the dude was the viral viral content
editor. There's a fast food restaurant in Fort Hood. I mean, you're talking about absolutely surface level content and plagiarism of basic facts from Wikipedia. This is absolutely the most superficial level of journalism you could possibly do.
Does that mean it doesn't matter that he? I mean, I assume that his workday was totally hectic. I'm going to safely assume that there was no malicious intent, and it was actually someone who failed to change the content that they were, you know, using for their sources. And that's all, because he probably had a hectic life and was constantly, you know, needed to make a new viral thing happen. So I think it seems a lot more forgivable than, you know, some, you know, Stephen Glass or somebody, some sort of dramatic fictionalizing. It just, I don't know. I guess it's fire-worthy, but it also seems sort of.
There's a weird line between, you know, like stealing ideas and intellectual content from like Reddit, which is basically what BuzzFeed is.
Right. Exactly.
And, you know, stealing words. I mean, there's this weird kind of. It's okay to just take pictures and give, you know, a tiny little link that no one will ever go to back to the original, you know, article or Reddit group that came up with it. But, you know, the words he stole is like Wikipedia, like level entry stuff, like.
And Yahoo Answers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, does that really? Sure. Okay, he should get fired for that, but think about it. It's so inconsequential compared to what. You know, BuzzFeed's made their entire, you know, business model and all their money off of, which is taking other people's ideas.
Yeah.
Don't we think that kind of necessitates them getting rid of him? I mean, if you're standing on that house of cards, you got to throw that guy off just so it detracts from the fact it's exactly what you do every single day. Like you can't. Once it becomes obvious, you got to toss that guy off the ship. You know.
No, that's exactly right. And they just implemented their new editorial standards, which supposedly allow them to go back to old posts, and either ditch them if they don't meet the standards, or correct them, or add anything else. I mean, I'm pretty skeptical of the way BuzzFeed manipulates the discourse. I mean, the one thing that is heartening about, if there's anything heartening about the sordid Benny Johnson story, is that you can get fired from BuzzFeed for something other than being a hater. And
no haters, please.
The line at the bottom of their, request for resumes or whatever is you have to not be a hater.
Every single one says that because I've looked at them. Every single one says that, and it's so irritating.
And as someone who I'm sure qualifies as a hater because of my piece about them, that's sort of nice to see.
No haters. This means you, Jordan. Yeah. I don't know. Every once in a while, when I really start to despise Gawker or BuzzFeed, there's always something where I'm like, oh, that wasn't bad. But there's a lot of bad content and a lot of... The day Gawker hires any remotely libertarian sympathetic person is going to be the day that I'm actually impressed by any of these people.
So you're never going to be impressed.
Exactly. Never.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say I lost all my faith in BuzzFeed when they fired Mark Duffy, the copy ranter guy, after he was too mean. He was too mean.
Yeah, he was a hater. It's true.
Yeah.
No haterade at BuzzFeed.
Yeah, they are annoying, aren't they? But I don't know. My true hatred still lies with Salon and Mark Ames and the Washington Free Beacon. Except for that one guy who's okay and needs a better job.
Should we talk about Mark Ames? I'd like to. I'd like to know what you guys think about some things.
I can't resist now that you're asking.
Or do we have time? Are we running out of time?
Joe, he asked so nicely to talk about Mark Ames. How can I say no to him?
That's true.
Jordan, what are your thoughts on Mark Ames? Tell us.
Well, so obviously it's just like a tissue of innuendo, but I think
is his entire existence, but I mean, be specific for the people out there.
I'm talking about the two pieces. The first one about Reason's supposed apartheid apologia, and then the second one, which was about the Holocaust denialism. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the second one, I think that's a little bit more dodgy, but
for Reason.
Has always been a big part of libertarianism. But as far as the apartheid apologetics piece goes, I think this is really interesting because Reason immediately disavowed that and said this is ridiculous. This journalist wasn't pro-apartheid at all. But it speaks to a really interesting sort of strategic historical debate that the right has, and which is the basic question: what do you not get to vote on? And when you're talking about the history of colonialism in Africa, are you going to open up the franchise even if it means an end to liberal institutions or a diminishing of economic freedom or something like that? And what you had among recent writers is an awareness of the evils of apartheid and that it was a horrible system, but that whatever might replace it might be worse. And that's the sort of sentiment, that's the sort of caveat that you're not allowed to suggest in today's post Nelson Mandela world. And that's what Mark Ames hung them out to dry for. And my question for a doctrinaire cosmopolitan libertarian is, how do you deal with that? Where do you are you allowed to admit the questions of what aren't people allowed to vote on? And it seems like Reason has studiously avoided those questions for a pretty long time. You don't really see them talk about them on their website now. And I think and that these things were dredged up by Mark Ames. I think that's sort of good. I think you need to realize that if you care about economic freedom more than democracy, then the nature of the left is it's going to come for you and it's going to call you evil.
Yeah, there's too much nuance. The nuance you just spoke, which I think is totally legitimate to consider, and you can't talk about that. Much like you can't, Rand Paul's old civil rights questioning disaster, even though he questioned one aspect of the Civil Rights Act, and he was surprisingly nuanced in his initial comments, and the Rachel Maddows of the world, interview him and put words in his mouth. And it's just not, you shouldn't even talk about certain things because you're not going to get a fair shake. And even careful people, like Paul was in that instance, are not going to get a fair shake when they dare to question this kind of thing because it's such a charged issue.
And that's the thing with the article, that Ames wrote. He, the reason, I think it was Mark Swainpool or whoever it was, who you search on the internet for him, there's nothing about him except for those couple things in Reason. But that's the thing. Mark Ames could have actually made a salient point about how libertarians the divide, I guess, between talking about economic freedom and kind of the race thing, especially with South Africa. They were so worried about socialism coming in and kind of just destroying all economic freedom. But Mark Ames doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to say this one little instance where a libertarian may have actually been being honest about something totally stains the entire magazine and its history and all libertarians.
The entire philosophy.
For literally like a 2-paragraph thing, that is Mark Ames's proof that Reason is this evil, horrible place that's racist and
Well, I mean, in terms of like the apartheid thing, it's a legitimate concern about the much more left people who were going to take over from this old apartheid system, to wonder what that's going to result in as well. But one shouldn't defend economic freedom for a tiny white minority, obviously, because that's if there's no way to quantify which one is worse, I suppose, but like you must reject them both because they're both fundamentally not good.
Right, and there's no discussion of that, like actual, Swainpool even admitted that his, kind of reporting would rankle actual libertarians back in the States, but, that was I hate to say, like a different time. There wasn't the information out there, there wasn't the kind of debate, I guess, going on. And so, but just the fact that Mark Ames uses that as his definitive proof is just ridiculous.
Now, in the second article,
the more interesting question, or the more interesting example it makes it a little bit more difficult to tell where libertarians should come down on this sort of decolonization question is Rhodesia. Rhodesia, it didn't have racial. It didn't have stated racial restrictions on voting. If you own property, you were allowed to vote, and obviously that de facto led to vastly more white participation than black participation. But the idea was, as black people became more economically empowered, they would gradually join the political system and also tend to support, more liberal policies. And Rhodesia, for a long time, was one of the fastest growing places in Africa. It was effectively a success story, and then it was crushed by, because for one thing, the British Empire wouldn't stick up for it. Kissinger sold it out, and so did South Africa. And it was eventually taken over by a Soviet-backed, Popular Front. And that's sort of that's a story that Mark Ames is completely comfortable with. Mugabe coming to power in Zimbabwe is a just outcome, according to Mark Ames's worldview. And I'm just not so sure if that's the case.
Well, he's a bad leader. I mean, like he's done bad things for the country, just in the sense that he wasn't a white colonialist. I mean, that is ending the story too early. But Ames is fundamentally not a credible source of anything. Like the second piece he's done most recently about Reason, it seemed potentially dodgier. Like I didn't have the energy to look into the Reason archives. The idea that it was about questioning the Holocaust and also historical revisionism. I guess Reason in the 70s had an entire issue talking about historical revisionism. And historical revisionism gets a bad rap because people act as if it's inherently means I don't believe in the Holocaust. Revisionism can also mean positive things like, was World War II, inevitable, and were the Allies, sepia-toned heroes, and you can be questioning some of the good things, questioning some of the basic principles that everybody learns in every history book now.
Exactly.
Or it could mean
some of the best works of libertarian history are revisionist, like the Myth of a Guilty Nation, or what is that? The Thomas Fleming books about FDR, and I don't know. As far as the Ames and the Holocaust revisionism thing, I don't know.
Some of the stuff sounded bad. the context that he chose and the quotes he chose, I will grant that. Maybe it was a bad idea. It was a bad issue.
Also, you're looking at somebody, at the Exiled. Mark Ames was a big fan of Edward Limonov, who is, one of the Soviet Union's or one of Russia's, top fascists.
Mm-hmm.
Founder of the National Bolshevik Party. He's a conditional supporter of fascism himself.
Which is, and that seems a little more less theoretical than even an ill-advised reason issue, is that he truly was supporting this guy. And he likes to describe how he liked to rape Russian teenagers and wanted them as soon as he found out they were 15. And basically, he's an awful person in every way, and we should never speak of him again, Jordan. Never.
The webs he weaves, like the little tendrils that he connects to, the image on that piece was the Koch brothers, reading about the Holocaust and how it didn't happen. As if they, personally approved.
Isn't that part of their ideological platform? Holocaust did not happen.
He's so ridiculous with the quotes that he picks out and the context that he creates for these pieces.
I mean, we can grant that may have been a bad issue, like a very bad issue. I haven't,
the New York Times had some bad issues.
Right, exactly. In liberalism,
It doesn't taint them forever for, having one guy who was wrong about something.
Or even a couple. I mean, libertarianism is a fringe belief that, fringe attracts other fringe beliefs, and there have been some unsavory ties that I wish weren't there. But, left ideas and right ideas have caused so much human misery has come out of people who subscribe to these beliefs, and particularly the left gets to be clean about it. They get to feel clean, and libertarianism gets sullied by a handful of people who got too cozy with some bad people.
It's like
it's just so convenient.
It's like saying slavery existed when, Democrats were in charge, or whatever, and then connecting that to the current Democratic Party or the current Republican Party, because somewhere back in time there was, a wrong idea somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, Ames, he has no credibility, so in so many ways we shouldn't talk about him, but he's such a conspiracy theorist. He's truly a conspiracy theorist in terms of the Koch brothers.
People to talk about it because he's sort of he's the best and most, he's the most well-researched version of a lot of, he makes the most well-researched case for a lot of assumptions that people seem to have about libertarianism. And we're all closet fascists or something. And, we're going to, as soon as we take power, we'll instate, the Ayn Rand slave state or something. Yeah, and so I think his ideas do bear talking about it and deconstructing and seeing where they go wrong.
He's just so staggeringly dishonest. I mean, at the end of the piece, the second piece with the revisionism stuff, I was wincing at a couple of the quotes he chose. I was. And at the end, he describes libertarianism as this idea that has been the driving force of the Republican Party for decades, I believe he says. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? What was that, Adam?
I said if only that were actually true.
I know, exactly. If only that were true. And
talk about historical revisionism.
Quite. And the moment you talk about that, I'm like, oh right, you have no credibility in anything. He believes libertarianism. He's one of those people that believes it was invented, in a bunker meeting in 1955.
Brothers and whoever else.
I always wonder. Sorry, Lucy.
Go on.
But so people. Well, first there's the air quotes around historical revisionism are quite humorous in that piece. But what does he think that professional historians do? That they just continue to repeat what's already been written? I mean, that's the whole point of being a historian, is revising. And
right.
This idea that historical revisionism is some kind of evil force or movement, that's dangerous. And it's also dangerous when you go back talking about South Africa, and if you talk about, it's dangerous to not consider these questions. Whether or not those questions are immoral or considered to be disgusting, someone has to consider those questions. And I guess we should all just censor ourselves because it makes people uncomfortable to think about these things. Even if people are saying there's no Holocaust and it's complete and utter bullshit, that doesn't mean that someone somewhere shouldn't say that. If only so that other people could be like, no, it is bullshit. There's definitely a Holocaust. Those people are dead.
Mm-hmm. Well, somewhere along the line, historical revisionism became like conservatives in Texas, changing textbooks.
Right, yeah.
True.
There's the chilling effect with just screaming racism or anti-Semitism or sexism at people. That's a very real danger in the world, especially.
And I think we see that in the United States, especially about
particularly all the time with certain libertarian women.
It's particularly bad among a certain class of like white liberal male journalists, where they're always yelling racist at other white people. And they're always yelling sexist. And sometimes I wonder, and it's my armchair psychology, how much of it has to do with their own, discomfort with themselves. I mean, these pieces are a classic case of a white liberal male journalist crying racism at other white people, and then kind of looking around going, yeah, right guys? And a lot of people are like, we don't really care about this, Like they just don't care. But he's like, no, and then the Jewish community is like, dude, really? I mean, there's always those people that are going to be like, that's right, Reason Magazine. But most people are like, this is not what we're interested in right now. We're much more interested in illegal wars in Gaza. So let's just, I don't know. But I really think we may have actually spent too much time on Mr. Ames, no matter how much we hate him.
A moment is too much.
Talking about him only makes him real.
I don't even think he is real. I interacted with his flunky on Twitter once and was appalled.
It's actually me, Lucy, by the way.
That would be really upsetting.
I am Mark Ames.
That would be really upsetting for so many reasons. Oh my God, as usual, we talked for too long, but unfortunately, it always starts getting good near the end, right when I'm going way over.
We gotta get warmed up. We need to do 40 minutes of just talking and then just put it live.
I may try that next time. I may do that. All right, let's wrap it up with a very quick dose of what are you enjoying this week that is not related to politics? And my answer is, wow, I don't even know. I started reading this book about World War I that's next to me, but that's sort of politics. All right, someone else go. Joe.
I've been listening to music again for the first time in a long time. Really digging some Band of Skulls and Fantagram.
I don't know what those are at all.
I'm entering my hipster phase.
Oh, God. It was bound to happen, but that's upsetting. Adam?
I'm enjoying Shenandoah National Park this week.
Oh, that's good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Should I go next? Okay. I saw Dive last night, the band. I'm not really doing a whole lot of non-politics stuff, but I just turned it in a review for The American Interest, a review of a history of pop music that should be forthcoming.
Sounds good. Michelle?
I've been hate watching the first few episodes of The Leftovers. Don't know if I like it. Don't know I don't know.
I watched one episode and I wasn't feeling it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean Christopher Eccleston, he played Doctor Who once, and he's in it, so that's the only thing that's really kept me watching. I'm like, hey, hopefully it gets better. Yeah. I mean, he plays a crazy priest or something, or reverend, whatever. So I've been hate watching that and sort of enjoying it.
Yeah, I honestly don't remember what I am doing. Though what I have to do after this podcast is sort of non-political, in that I'm going to hang out with a blogger libertarian woman who does The Honest Courtesan. So that'll be fun. All right. Who wants to promote something? Adam? Do you have anything to promote to the people?
Yeah, I'm still working on my natural fitness. You can find it on Instagram at Aspen and Iron. Check out my natural fitness pictures online.
Okay, good. Joe, anything?
I'm building some more websites for people. That's about it. My band has a new CD coming out.
Someday I'm gonna go see your band, Joe.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Joe helped me with an IP issue, or not intellectual property, just like I accidentally assigned the same IP address to 2 laptops, and over Twitter I'm like, Joe, help me. And he's sort of Joe,
so you're promoting Joe's skills right now?
Yeah. So
nice.
Ask him to build more websites. So.
Very good. Jordan, what are you working on besides what you just said?
Blogging, writing, editing, read the Daily Caller, read the Mitch Ray Hughes, my blog. Follow me on Twitter. Just same old.
No one can spell your blog name, Jordan. No one.
Okay, I'll spell it. Mitrailleuse.
I saw you struggling. I saw you remembering.
Yeah, I know.
I'll link to it so people will
We
actually.
had it tabbed so we can look at it.
Okay. God only knows how long that went, but it got pretty good. So I hope the audience, our one viewer out there, and our future viewers enjoyed it. Thank you, Adam, Joe, Michelle. Talk more next time because you're good at talking. And Jordan, thank you for joining me. And tune in next time, whenever the hell that happens. Bye.
And the strong response from Goldfarb is that they're not used to people hitting back. The neocons have been going after, I think it would be fair to say, our people for years now, and what they don't like is that someone hit back. And the fact is, if things are going to change in the Republican Party, more people are going to have to start hitting back.
I know that your colleague Jamie Weinstein, I was on HuffPost Live with him once, actually talking about neocons, and he's repeated this since then, but like he basically says that nobody knows what a neocon is anymore except a thing they don't like. And I feel like that's sort of like they have like a bit of a martyr thing going on just because they're not as fashionable as they were a couple years ago.
Exactly, and it is poorly applied, but that's a weaselly way of getting out of actually talking about them and how they really haven't gone anywhere. I mean, Robert Kagan had that cover story in the New Republic just recently about what America still owes the world, and his wife is in the Obama administration. I mean, these people are still there.
Mm-hmm. Back a little bit to the whole like the liberty conservative, freedom conservative thing. I just like laughed at when I first saw, because like that's not a good way to actually differentiate between beliefs. That's like it was a bizarre suggestion because I mean, you can't tell what the hell that doesn't mean anything. Like liberty or freedom. These guys support liberty and these guys support freedom. Like
yeah, and what really sort of chafed my balls about it is that I've always been partial to, if you're going to pick a concept, liberty or freedom, I've always sort of been partial to freedom. You know, because liberty is a guy in a powdered wig, freedom is a guy in a kilt with a claymore. You know, and I've always sort of been partial to freedom as a concept, and to have that tarred with these warmongers that have nothing to do with liberty or freedom was sort of I don't know, I didn't like that.
Yeah, I just think it seems like a deliberate attempt to be more opaque, which
and also get rid of loaded terms that neither side particularly likes to be using. I mean, John Bolton doesn't like to be called a neocon, and he isn't, but you know, for all purposes, no, he's not.
He's an asshole, but that's a different story.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, even if you're a hawkish realist, which is technically what he is, you know, if you're employed by AEI and Fox News, what are you going to be saying? You're going to be making assumptions about American power. You're going to be writing things, you know, in that vein. Yeah.
I always found it bizarre that AEI is supposedly, you know, one of like the friends of libertarianism. I always thought that was completely bizarre, because they have a lot of really awful, really hawkish people working for them. It seems almost like a litmus test for them. That's weird. Opening up discussion about neocons, I guess. Do you guys have some words about this?
Well, I was going to say it's a conscientious rebranding, kind of to get away from neocon, because that word, you know, itself is kind of tarnished through the neocon legacy of Bush and Cheney and all them. So
yeah, I wonder why it's tarnished there, buddies. Like, it just pisses me off that they're trying to, you know, like Blackwater changing their name. Like, if you change your name, suddenly it's going to fix all the things that happened.
Right, and it's kind of like, you know, when liberalism wanted to become progressivism, you know.
Yeah, progressive sounds so damn positive, right?
Right.
How could you be against progress? I hate that word too.
Right. I'm against progress, but I actually am most interested in how many iterations previously that neoconservatism has gone through, because a lot of these guys have been, you know, in the government since the 70s and 80s. So how many iterations of this type of philosophy have we actually seen? It's only come into being because Bush rode that wave of, versus there was the compassionate conservatism, which is its own oxymoron. But then post 9/11, they were able to be like, look, we're the ones who are out there. We're going to put bullets in turbans. That's not my quote. And
hi, welcome to Politics for People Who Hate Politics, episode 9. That's a lot of episodes, so that's pretty exciting. All right, the guests today, we've got Joe, because that's good. We like Joe. He's related to me. That's good. We have Michelle. We have Adam Berkeley, who is not quite a panel staple yet. This is his second time on, but he did so well, even while lying down in the dark and not looking at the camera last time. And we also have our notable human being guest, who once let me sleep on his couch, and that was nice of him, Jordan Bloom, who's the opinions editor of the Daily Caller, and he used to be an associate editor for the American Conservative, and he writes a blog that seems really interesting but has too many big words for me, so I don't read it as often as I should. Thank you for joining me, everybody.
Surely.
All
right, so many deadpan people for a little time. Okay, well, if I drink the coffee, we'll get this going. All right, I guess we're going to start with Jordan, if that really is your name, because there's always been some debate about that. Can you tell us about, a couple weeks ago, your piece on Ben Smith of BuzzFeed and the freedom conservative, liberty conservative nonsense idea that basically was trying to be opaque about neoconservatism? Can you kind of sum up your article for the people?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ben Smith wrote this sort of 10,000-foot big think piece about how we're going to talk about right-wingers in a new way. We're gonna separate them into two groups: the liberty conservatives and the freedom conservatives. And the liberty conservatives are the the Ron Paul, the Rand Paul types, the people who care more about lost liberty here than spreading it abroad, and the freedom conservatives are the opposite. And I had written a long piece about a month or two ago about Anglican neocons, and I wish I hadn't pulled it. I pulled it for personal reasons, because my family attends one of these breakaway Anglican churches, which happen to be filled, at least in Virginia, with a lot of hawkish people. I pulled that one, but I wish I hadn't, because it would have been a good riposte to the accusation that I'm an anti-Semite. Like, I hate Christian neocons too. I don't hate them, I just think they're wrong. But so I wrote that up, and interestingly, one of the more incriminating, fascinating little points of data is a vestryman at the Falls Church, one of these breakaway Anglican congregations in northern Virginia. A vestryman, which is just sort of the lay body that governs the church. One of the vestrymen is a charter school magnate in D.C. And before that, he was a CEO of an energy company which bought the electricity grid in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, which is one of Goldfarb's clients. And of course, Matthew Continetti, the editor of the Free Beacon, if you read his 2010 profile of how awesome Georgia's being under Saakashvili, he praises Saakashvili's electrification efforts. So it's a ridiculous little circle jerk. And
I mean, the aim here with these people is, like, a lot of people say it's actually to start a new Cold War. Do you think it's actually that direct? Like, they actually want a new conflict with Russia for various reasons?
I think that's it's sort of it's a conspiracy of bad assumptions, not a real conspiracy, I guess. I think the people at the Free Beacon really genuinely and sincerely do think that, Iran is an existential threat to America for some reason. It's not it's an evil system that doesn't require evil behavior from any of its members, and that's what I've been trying to emphasize to people. But as far as wars go, I think the reason why my piece inspired the reaction that it did, as an autistic follower of these issues, at the end of the piece, he credits Michael Goldfarb with coming up with the term freedom conservatives. And
That would be the dude in charge of the Free
That
Beacon,
would be the
right?
chairman of the Center for American Freedom, the 501c4 that runs the Free Beacon, or the Center for American Freedom, the nonprofit that is above the Free Beacon, the publication. And so it suggested to me that this was sort of transparent rebranding. The neocons are not popular anymore, so they don't want to be called neocons. And so I wrote a piece about it, and also, mentioning the somewhat cozy relationship between BuzzFeed and the Free Beacon themselves. BuzzFeed is hired from the Free Beacon. Ben Smith has had a long relationship with Goldfarb. They've had a working relationship for at least 3 or 4 years. According to so I also looked in, and I think I'm the first righty to have written about it. But Goldfarb is he's literally a foreign agent. He's in the employ of foreign governments, or at least he was. He may still be, particularly Georgia. That was probably the biggest one. And so I mentioned that. And neocons don't really like. It's sort of the suggestion of dual loyalty that they can't really stand. And usually when that ugly accusation comes up, it's usually with relation to Israel. And I wasn't suggesting that he's some sort of Likudist fifth column. He's literally in the employ of a foreign government. That's a pretty substantially different accusation.
I mean, does he deny that fact?
No, he hasn't denied it. He actually said in his in the follow-up piece that was running above the fold in the Free Beacon, sort of a character assassination of me.
Yeah, I called you an anti-Semite.
He called me an anti-Semite, and but he admitted in that piece that all my facts were right. So and I have yet to hear another word from him, but I wrote a piece at my blog just 2 days ago talking about, and so I had wished